Welcome to the AoW Worship Podcast. I'm Lauren Levisor.
And I'm Chris Davis, swallowing some coffee.
And this is number 3. Today we're going to be talking about what you can do to have a successful rehearsal and the tools on how to get there.
Right. So Lauren came to me and had this idea for a podcast, but it was born out of what's a nice way to say a particularly bad rehearsal.
A difficult night.
It was a difficult night, and it was a night that was already pretty squished on time. And we most people don't have rehearsals that are just open-ended and can keep going and going. In this particular case, it was before a service.
Right.
So we had a time that we had to stop. So without getting into specifics, if you haven't listened to our podcast before, we come from 2 different churches in California, and we don't use names, and we're not going to go there. If you know us, then obviously you know where we go. But so we're going to keep it on the vanilla side of things, where you're not going to really get specifics. But take us through or give us an example of kind of how things can kind of avalanche, how they start small and they kind of get bigger and bigger.
Let's see. I'm trying to remember if anybody showed up late that night. I don't think so. I think our worship leader was the last one to show up, but I mean, that doesn't necessarily throw anything off. It wasn't late or anything. I believe we came to a stage that was fairly messy. The soundboard had, it's a digital board, so everything was kind of routed.
Right.
The saved setting was kind of routed in strange ways that we had to figure out where things were. Just little things that compounded. Just little audio problems, and then guitar problems, and just different equipment not working and things. So
yeah, so it was kind of one of those, like you just said, it was little tiny things added up to very large, and then before you know it, it's time for downbeat, and and
we're just trying to figure out what we can get done in the time that we have left, and will things work, and so
right. So take me through a rehearsal.
All right. So
what is a rehearsal?
So as far as I'm concerned, I've kind of always had this thing where in my mind, practice is what you do at home to prepare, and rehearsal is when the band comes together and makes what you've prepared happen. I know there's just kind of a little distinction there that I'm making, but
no, I think it's good to say, because I think some people think rehearsal is when you do learn your part.
Right. And, any leader who's been trying to lead a group, a band, can tell when that person is looking at the chart for the first time that night.
Contrary to popular belief, I think a lot of people don't realize the leader can hear that.
Yeah. So, first of all, it helps if everybody shows up on time, and we'll get into this later too. But, so everybody shows up, they set up, get all their stuff done, plugged in. Hopefully at that point, you've got a good sound man that can take the reins and get everything sound checked, get all the levels set.
Do you recommend people show up before rehearsal time to set up if they have, like, say, amps and things? Right.
We kind of have a general rule that if you have any equipment to set up, you show up, you should know how much time you need, but say like 15 minutes earlier than the actual posted rehearsal start time. Show up early, get your stuff set up. Vocalist usually can show up at the start time, because really all they have to do is pick up a mic usually. Yeah. Unless you have a team that goes through vocal warm-ups. I haven't been part of a team that's done that, but I guess some might.
Yeah. I know, in the teams that I serve on with you at your church, it's kind of a part of the after everything's done, we go into a room and run through some vocal stuff, but yeah.
Right.
Okay. So we have everyone showing up a little ahead of time if they have equipment to set up. Everyone's on time. Everyone should show up knowing their stuff, their parts. Okay.
Yeah. And so, like I said, then the sound man takes it, he mixes everybody in, gets the levels, and then hands the reins over to the worship leader, who then should take us through efficient yet fun practice rehearsal.
So what's efficient? Break that down for me, because I've seen rehearsals ran by people that I would not consider to be efficient, but
Well, yeah, and it's going to be different for everybody. I think each leader has their strengths and weaknesses. And yeah, that was kind of one of the things that I wanted us to get into was as a worship leader, you should be able to recognize your strengths and weaknesses. So, some people might be people, right, where they really they connect with people a lot. They get energized around people, and so they're going to be more prone to talk more and kind of focus on the interactions between the bandmates, and maybe a little less focused on the task of let's make sure that we get every part of this song down.
Right.
Whereas others will be more task oriented and no, we're not here to have fun. We're here to get through this song, start to finish, and everybody has to hit the parts right, that kind of thing. So you got to find your medium and find where your, like I said, your strengths and weaknesses are. So
I know we're probably getting off into what makes a good leader land, which is probably not necessarily part of this episode, but do you find that having a person weighted in one way is better than another way, or is it really a 50-50 is better?
It's just a process of getting to know each worship leader. If you have multiple worship leaders on your team. For us, we have several, so it's just a process of over time getting to know them, what they're like, and maybe helping in those areas where they are deficient. So, yeah, and just kind of knowing what's going to happen and what's going to work.
Okay.
So, what can the worship leader do to have a more successful rehearsal? I feel like the first thing is to have an overall plan of, what the songs are going to be, what the arrangement of that song is going to be, and what keys you're going to play in. Anything that you would add to that?
No, I think that's good. I think this is a good place where I find things, if they're going to change, will change. Like if you came to a rehearsal as a leader with one thing in mind, and then you get there and for whatever reason, A isn't working, or B is not working or whatever, like that's when you're going to start changing things. And, that's when you freak out all your musicians and your guitar players look at you like, come on, man. That's then they have to capo. Horror. Sorry. No, I won't go there. We'll talk about that later.
All right. So Chris, being a worship leader yourself, what are some of the other things that you try to keep in mind during a rehearsal?
I think going back to kind of what we were talking about, it depends on what rehearsal time or what rehearsal circumstances we have. So, for instance, I know in my case, most of our rehearsals are done on a day outside of a day with a service on it.
Yeah.
So, like, we practice like on a Thursday. So, I think in that case, it's a little more open-ended as far as like I don't feel pressured to hit these these diamonds or whatever, like hit these things. So in that case, I think I make sure to come to rehearsal with kind of a big picture view of things. So like when I'm talking to my musicians or the singers or things, I'm making sure that when I show up, I have in my mind already the stuff that's important. So I'll like for instance, if there's a lead guitar line that is really important to a song, I'll make sure that is prepared. I mean, he'll my guitar player, he's awesome. He comes prepared with his stuff. And even if not, it's a pretty quick process. But also it's picking apart the parts that maybe they didn't hear were fitting together. So one song in particular I can think of, there's a lead guitar part line and a piano that doubles it, right? And I think that individually they probably heard that, but so fit them together is kind of one of the things I'll try to do is work with them and how those transitions happen. So I think in that case, I feel like I have a little more flexibility, but I know that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this might be getting a little off topic, but just to bounce off of that.
Yeah.
So you have the benefit of having a fair amount of knowledge of each instrument yourself. I know that, you wouldn't say I'm a drummer, but you can play drums.
Never would say.
Yeah, I know. But you know all the instruments. You play all the instruments to some degree. Mm-hmm. And so you're able to hear those things and know how those things fit and everything. What would you say to a leader that doesn't have any experience on any instrument but their own? And then how to bring that into rehearsal for what you're saying of the different parts?
You're asking me the question that I kind of dread ever having to answer. That is a really good question. I think that, well, if I'm being completely honest, and let's say that I was having that conversation with somebody, I would say, have you ever sat down and tried to play the instrument? Because even a cursory understanding of an instrument will help you tremendously in how it kind of behaves itself. Like you don't want to, I would never say if you don't play piano, sit down and until you can play like Mozart or whatever, don't. You can't lead a pianist. That's not true. But I think, if you sat down and plunked out a line on something or even learned a couple of basic chords, I think that would get you into a mindset that's a lot easier to communicate with a person who plays that instrument than if you've never touched it. Mm-hmm. Or, a guitar player. If you've never touched a bass, pick up a bass because it's an entirely different animal. I think a lot of people in that case think it's just, it has bigger strings and it's lower. And it's no, that's ridiculous. It's this whole different thing. So, and the same goes for, acoustic versus electric, guitar, drums. That's one I know is probably scary out of all of them for people to even think about sitting down and say, look, with other instruments, it's 2 hands maybe, or one. That one's 4 limbs. So, but even in that case, I'll sit down with people who I know can't play drums, or they ask, teach me to play drums or whatever. And I'm okay, first, I'm not a drummer, but I'll show them, the 4 pieces, how they fit together, and try to explain to them, in that case, in fact, I've had this conversation with drummers, is when you think about it as a one instrument, as opposed to 4 different limbs hitting different things, it changes the way your mind approaches the instrument. So even in that way, if I was talking to someone who'd never touched a drum set before, it's try to think of it as a single instrument. So when you're approaching it, give the drummer cues that they would maybe understand, as opposed to, no, hit that cymbal-y thing. Instead of saying that, say it needs to go tss, tss, and they can translate that into, okay, it's a hi-hat or something. You know what I mean? So if you can put yourself in a mindset to communicate at least on a I don't know, basic level with somebody, I think it'll change.
One of my favorite things is how different worship leaders try to communicate drums to the drummer. That can get hilarious.
Yeah, well, they turn into these weird beat boxes, right? Yeah.
Anyway.
I hear you. And you're right. I guess, unfortunately, in some cases, have the benefit of being able to show, the people in my band, if they're struggling with something, I can sit down and kind of go, okay, it goes like this. And, or at least even if I miss it, they'll get, oh, okay, I can see it now. So yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. Yeah. That's a tough one. I wish you hadn't asked that.
Maybe we'll edit it out. All right. So yeah, anything else before we move on?
No, unless you want to pull something else out of me that I'm not ready to answer.
All right. So moving on to the rest of the team. So it's not just about worship leaders.
Yes.
What can the rest of the team do to prepare for making a rehearsal work?
Are you asking me, or is that just a room question that you can answer?
Sure. Anybody in the room can answer.
Anybody
that has a mic. Yeah.
You over there. Go ahead. I'll let you go first on this one. I feel like I've talked.
Well, we've hit some of it already. Come with your parts known. Mm-hmm. That's going to help the whole team. Be on time if you have gear. Come early. Know how your parts affect the other parts in the band. This is huge, especially for drummers and bassists. And then you can even say keys players too. Basically everybody. I'm a bassist, so that's the first thing I think of is how am I syncing up with that kick?
Right.
And is he even paying attention to that? Yeah. Am I paying attention to that?
I'm actually surprised at how many drummers or bass players don't realize that they're a unit. Mm-hmm. A rhythm section is like a foreign concept. Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of people that join worship teams are kids or people who have probably played by themselves a lot. So when they sit down with another musician, let alone one that incorporates like bass or drums with rhythm, yeah, it's like foreign. And I'm always surprised at that, where they're like, what are you talking about? Kick drum. I'm like, are you listening to the drums? They're like, not really. I'm like, you're a bass player.
Well, and for us, we have a really large team. And so everybody's on a schedule, rotating. You know, you may not be playing with the same people every time, most likely not. And so what we've decided is that we will play the album version.
Okay.
We will reference a specific version. You know, it's like, okay, pick one of the 9 versions of this song. That's the one we're doing. And so everybody prepares that. So we know what to expect, and we know whose part is working with somebody else's. And we do have freedom for improvising and for kind of flowing into different sections, but for the most part, you're sticking to that roadmap.
Right.
And so if the drummer's playing a groove that doesn't match what's on the album, the other parts may not work with that groove.
Right.
And, or, you know, picking on a drummer here, but...
Well, unfortunately, and I think most drummers know that, I mean, they're the backbone.
Yeah.
You know, if the drums are off or in some way not working, it just throws everything off. And I hate to put that much pressure on a drummer, but it's true.
Or the bass player, if he's just playing straight 8s through the whole song, but, you know, that song had this very specific pattern, this groove that locked in with that kick, and now the song just doesn't have that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, groove is a big one, especially in worship music, because most of the time you're not creating anything overly complex musically. I mean, you're, you know, sticking to 4-ish chords, always the same. Or, you know, I mean, a lot of musicians get frustrated at the simplicity of it, but I think, you know, the simplicity of it can get lost on people, that it really is a less is more, and you have to, that groove is important, or whatever it is, you're, you know, that makes that kind of flow of the song work. If it's not there, it just, you know.
And then keep up communication with the guitar players. You know, I'm playing down here, so you're playing up here.
Right.
Or, you know, with the keyboardists, making sure that you're not overlapping certain areas and frequencies of the other people.
That's a big one. You know, I remember, since you brought that up, I remember, and I'm sure lots of people who listen to this or elsewhere have either seen or heard this, but Paul Baloche had this really good, and I know he didn't invent this idea, but he had a really good training video for worship teams that covered that. And, you know, I'll be honest, I think early on when I was, you know, an early leader, worship leader, whatever you want to call it, I hadn't really thought much about the spectrum. And we're not talking about spectrum, I'm talking about, you know, frequency spectrum. Right. So, you know, bass drum and kick drum and bass or low, and cymbals and, you know, keyboards and high and whatever. So when he broke that down and was kind of talking about, you know, where each instrument should occupy or should focus on as far as the spectrum goes, I was like, man, that changes a lot, because I think if you don't know that as a worship musician, I think that you could end up causing mud when you don't necessarily mean to, and you can make your team leader's life a million times better by just playing in the right octaves. Right. you know. In fact, shameless plug for Academy of Worship. In the tools for electric guitar players, I forgot what it's called. Tools for electric guitar and worship or something like that. I actually talk about that. Where I go over kind of like if the acoustic guitar player is down low and the electric guitar player decides he just wants to chord in the same exact place, that you're not necessarily helping things, that maybe you should move up an octave or whatever. So anyway, I think that basic understanding, especially from other musicians in the band, can take a lot of pressure off of a worship leader or other musicians to try to explain that.
Well, it's going to give your sound man a better source to work with, because I think for a lot of churches, they'll probably have a volunteer sound man who doesn't necessarily have a command of EQ to the point of, okay, I know that this instrument, I'm going to put a high pass on it, and I'm going to make sure that I, you know...
What's a high pass filter, Lauren?
Oh, for all those people out there that aren't home recordists?
That's right.
It cuts all the lows. It's also known as a low cut.
Right.
And you can select at which point of the frequency that you can cut all the lows off. Yeah.
It just cuts all the lows out. That's it.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of information there that you can cut out with EQ or get rid of that opens up the mix, because now you're not fighting the same frequencies with other instruments. And so if they don't have a command of that, simply the band themselves playing in the right areas where they're not conflicting with each other can separate that out
Totally.
a little bit better. And then if you do have somebody who knows how to mix more than just faders, then they can actually, get that a little bit more.
Yeah, and I don't even think it's, I mean, that soundman thing is an excellent point, because I think, even a soundman who knows what he's doing may not, I mean, a lot do, but some of them may not understand why things are sounding muddy. Like, he knows that his EQ, like, okay, I've EQ'd the electric guitar, it's not sitting in a low spectrum, and the acoustic's not, they're not fighting frequency-wise. I can see it on the board, but he may not realize that the two people are playing in really non-complementary places on their necks, and they need to, you know what I mean? So I think even with an experienced sound guy, he may not be able to articulate, okay, you guys sound, the two guitars are mixing and getting muddy, and I can't clean it up. Is there something you guys can do? Maybe it's your tone on your amp. And instead of the electric guitar player going, oh, I'm playing in the same octave as the acoustic, maybe I should move and play like triads up high or something. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, this is a good segue. I mean, what can the sound man do to make sure that a rehearsal goes well? Hopefully most teams have their sound man show up to the rehearsal instead of just turning the system on and making sure that sound is coming out somehow and then going about getting the songs done.
I admit we just started doing this intentionally. Mm-hmm. A lot of it was born out of, we didn't have a sound guy who could make it on Thursdays, but we kind of do now. And so it's really helped, I think. I think that's an important thing to do, because they can make notes about arrangements. Mm-hmm. They can make notes about maybe particular parts in the song that need to lift in a certain instrument that they have control over. I mean, even though a guitar player can hit a boost, or, I don't know, a drummer can hit an accent on a certain part of his kit, it doesn't change the fact that, like, if there's a part that really needs to stand out and it's coordinated with the sound guy, he can help you out there. Or even stuff that you don't have control over, like maybe he needs to throw some delay on a part, mm-hmm. that really opens up, everyone else drops out and it's a lot of vocal and keyboard and the vocals are just dry, yeah. Maybe he needs to throw a nice delay on there or something like that. So I think you make a good point in that I think that a worship team needs to think outside of the platform, mm-hmm. because, and I'm guilty of this, we get stuck up on stage like that, where it's like just who's up there, and it's not. It's the multimedia people, if you have those. It's the sound person, if you have that. Mm-hmm. If you have lighting people, it's them. Everybody, including the pastor, for that matter. But
and hopefully you have somebody that not only volunteers and shows up and moves some faders, but also knows the system. So if something out of the ordinary is needed, then they're on top of it. And I can throw a new direct box up here, and we can plug that in for you, or whatever it is. They know their system. They know what they can do. They have extra things in supply. They have a different mic if this one's just not working, or whatever that is.
So not to beat the sound guy thing to death, but I think a lot of churches are working with not that.
Right.
They're working with a sound person who's a volunteer. Mm-hmm. They have a heart to serve, but they don't have a history in audio. They know what you show them as far as moving this fader makes the lead vocal louder. They don't tweak EQ. They don't know what compression does, whatever. So in that case, what would you do? I know that your church doesn't necessarily face this issue,
but
which is why I'm asking.
I came from all those years at your church, so
what are you saying? No, I'm just kidding.
We had that for many, many years. I would say that everything that we're talking about is a place to grow in, mm-hmm. and that these are tools to make rehearsals more efficient. And the more you know about all of this, it's going to help. And so I think a lot of times, until you have specific people in place, a lot of it falls on the worship leader.
Yeah.
Or maybe you just have somebody in the band who's really techie and he knows, like, he's got a passion for audio engineering or something.
Right.
And so lean on that person. Mm-hmm. Just know your group and their skills.
Yeah, that's what I find as well, is that it kind of works itself out. I don't think God allows mm-hmm. it not to. Like, I think that if people are serving with a heart for him, then I think he fills the role in a way that needs to get filled. Not necessarily the way that Chris wants it filled, or the way Lauren wants it filled. Right. But, like in our case, we don't have people that are running sound, and they're admittedly so, are audiophiles or audio people, but they have a heart to serve, and they do a great job. And you're right; it falls on myself, or we have another guy on our team who went to school for audio stuff, and so he has a passion for it. In fact, once he showed up at the church, like, our audio stuff just sounded way better instantly. But so I think you're right. But I think that would be, and again, I don't want to get too far off topic here, but that would be like maybe a program that myself or someone would start and really train people up. So
yeah, and I don't know if we've hit on this in a different podcast yet or not, but I feel like God doesn't bring your team to a place that you're not prepared for. I think there can be a tendency to look at maybe larger churches or worship teams that are maybe more skilled than you, or further along, or whatever you want to call it, and go, oh, we should be there. Let's try to do that. Well, you don't have the skills or the personnel or the people or the training to do that yet, but God's given you the people that you need for where you're at right now.
Yep.
So scale it down to what you have and what your gifts are and what your training is already at, and then learn more and add people as they come in. And God will provide that.
Absolutely.
And so be true to who you are, where God's got you.
Yeah. Yep. And we saw that at my church. I mean, in fact, I think I would go as far as to say I got too big for my britches at one point, and God had to do some work in me. And you're right. It was the kind of thing where I was, trying to be, 4 steps ahead of God, and it's laughable, but it happens. And so, yeah, you're right. He does it.
Yeah. So quickly, before we run out of time here, what can we do to redeem the time when everything just starts going wrong in a rehearsal?
I'm going to Jesus juke on this one. I'm going to say, but I'm serious. It sounds like a
pray and hold on.
Kind of. It kind of comes down to that. In our line of work, at least as far as this podcast is concerned, and the folks that listen, we're in a ministry that likes to think it's in control of itself. When every time, we lead God's people in worship, it becomes very evident that we are not in control of the whole thing. And I think, I don't know if maybe it's just my having had so many of the things that feel like train wrecky or like, oh man, I'm so not in control, that I've gotten used to the leaning into God thing. But I think that's what I'm getting at, is I think that when you're at, your service is at 9:00 or whatever, and you're at 8:55, and you're in the, hopefully by that point you've cut losses and gone into the room to pray, wherever you pray. Hopefully you're at that point. If not, I don't know, you need to learn that, but just pray and go, God, okay, obviously, this is not something that we have a lot of control over. And I every time it seems like that's enough, because I think you just lose yourself to the fact that, what's going to happen is going to happen.
And ultimately, those tend to be the best services.
Right? Yeah.
You just go, God, we have to lean on you.
Yeah. So as much as that sounds like a cop-out of like, well, when things are going really bad, what do you do? I just pray, man. Just pray. But that's it. I mean, in a ministry like this, that's all you got. I mean, your whole job is basically praying with music, right? So I don't know. I think it's funny the way that we approach it, and then the reality that God smacks us with is funny. But would you agree with that, or am I off base?
I would. I was hoping to maybe get to some maybe
practical things
things before we just went there, because now I feel like I'm totally dismissing God.
See, Jesus juked. I did it.
You did.
I was like, what?
You did. Threw me off.
Yeah. So practical things. Okay.
So as far as the worship leader, I think they have to develop an awareness and be flexible enough to know when to just cut their losses. And maybe you have to throw a song off.
Yeah.
Just be like, you know what, we were going to do this one, but it's not going to work out today. And have something else that's a go-to. You know what? How great is our God? Go.
Right.
Because, we've played it a million times or whatever.
Guilty. I've done that. Yeah. You get to a certain point where you just got to cut it.
Yeah. Or, just develop those troubleshooting skills of how to get through the rehearsal. It's like, your amp blew up. Do we have enough time to maybe throw another one on stage and try to get that going? Or what can we do?
Right.
What are our options? Or maybe it's just a bad cable. Okay, well, let's throw another cable up there. Oh, that wasn't it. And you kind of go through these things, but how far do you go before you go, you know what? You go ahead and try to figure it out. The rest of the band's going to keep rehearsing, and hopefully you'll be able to come back in.
Yeah. I mean, I would say even go as far as, we're talking about cutting a song, but cutting a musician. I believe I'm thinking of the right time. I apologize if I'm making this up, but I seem to recall a time where we had something like that happen. I don't remember what it was, but it was something where it was like affecting the person's ability to make sound.
Right.
And it got so close to the time that it was like, look, if you can't make sound in the next like 30 seconds, just go sit and worship. Like,
yeah,
no one's standing up here doing nothing. Maybe maybe you can be a worshiper, just put your hands up and just really guide people. And, yeah. So cut your losses sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes, again, not to Jesus juke, but sometimes I think God does that for maybe teaching moments or allows us to fail in that so that we can maybe lean into him better, or because I've had times like that where again it's like, oh man, this is falling apart, like, oh my God, and then there's this amazing people really can enter in. So
all right.
One more thing I wanted to bring up because it reminded me of it, and we can go a little bit long. That's fine. We're not going to kill anybody. Talkback mics. It's a broad, big subject. I know that we can't cover it in like 40 seconds, but
yeah,
one thing that we employed, and I credit that the sound person I mentioned before that came to our church and has since then become a big part of our team. He had talked about, I had seen it, I knew it existed, but he talked about how musical directors sometimes on stage will have a mic that obviously doesn't route to the mains, but it routes to in-ears or in-ears. And so if you're not running in-ears, this is probably not applicable to you, but in our case we do, and I know with you guys you do. You don't always run a talkback mic, but the point of it is, if you never heard of it, is a mic that either the worship leader with a tool that like I have, it's a pedal that's a momentary switch that I can click and it literally routes the same mic I sing into the ears. Or if you have another person on stage who's like your music director, they have a mic that's just dedicated to that for the ears, so they can call things out. Because, I think even with all the practice in the world, sometimes the Holy Spirit moves and everyone knows he's moving. And sometimes it's nice to have a person who confirms that into a microphone. Yeah. So, and I've used it for just simple things where I communicate with our media team. Or I've had people where, they haven't muted a mic or something that's not live in the system, but it's live in our ears. And I have to step on my thing like, guys, can you please kill, the pastor's mic? I can't hear what's going on. So that's a tool, I think, a practical tool, getting back to kind of what you asked for. I think that, if you haven't thought about, you run ears and you have an extra mic laying around and maybe a channel you can route it to, give it a shot. It's actually really helpful. It sounds goofy, but when you start using it, it's really nice.
Yeah. And we'll have to maybe in a different podcast go into the music director position.
Yeah.
More in depth. I think that'll help people. They're probably like, who are they talking
about? Yeah, musical what now?
So yeah, some other tools that might actually help teams. So Planning Center was huge for us.
Yes.
That actually allowed our team, as we grew, to stop having a midweek practice.
Cool.
And so Planning Center, it's planningcenteronline.com.
Yep.
And everything gets scheduled. Anybody who's doing any position in the service is on there, scheduled. You can accept, decline, block out dates.
And I will say, if you're not using it yet and you want to try it out, they have a free one. It's like up to, 10 people or something. Nice. And like you can store like maybe 250 megs on there or something. But you can tie, like Lauren's talking about, it has kind of built-in tools so that you can list a song. It has an MP3 tied with it or a YouTube video tied to it.
Song charts. Yeah.
So like when you plan something, the musicians can just literally pull up what they want, listen to it, practice with it. It's got iPad and Android and stuff, apps. So it's totally cross-platform. Very helpful. I agree.
Yeah.
That helped us a lot.
AVMs we already talked about, or other in-ear systems.
Right. And if you don't know, an AVM, or there's other, Behringer has some for their stuff, and I think Yamaha, and there's a bunch of people that have them now, but they're standalone little things that sit at your station that gives each person an individual mix of whatever they want to hear.
Yeah.
So those are helpful.
Let's see, you hit on the talkback mic already. And the one that you're using, OnSong.
Yes, my favorite. I have recently turned over one of our good buddies to using OnSong, and I'm so proud of that. Yeah, awesome app. The reason I bought an iPad, actually, was this program called OnSong. And just to hit on it briefly, and again, we're not paid to endorse these people. It's just they're very helpful in worship.
I'm actually thinking of buying an iPad for a $10 app.
I'm telling you. It's so worth it.
Ridiculous.
So it's an app that you import songs into. You can go in and edit them. And again, I won't get into too much detail, but once you edit them and put them into this kind of format that's uses metadata and stuff, you can change keys on the fly. You can tell it you're putting a capo wherever you want to put it. It'll tell you what chord shapes to play. And so it's been very helpful, not only to get rid of a massive binder of music, which was really nice, and put it on one little thing, but also to have that kind of capability.
Yeah.
Metronomes and all kinds of stuff. So yes, OnSong. Yay.
Yay. All right. To sum up, no matter what position you have in the team, you can be doing something that will make your rehearsals go smoothly, that you get a lot out of it, that you will remember more. You can help the team out in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Find what that is and do it.
Yep. Step up, do your thing. All right, well, that'll do it for us for a nice long edition of the Academy of Worship podcast. I am Chris Davis.
I'm Lauren Levasseur.
And you have a good day. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We've got a YouTube account. It's youtube.com/Academy of Worship. And swing on over to facebook.com/Academy of Worship online. Give us a like there, and we can chat with you online.
And if you have anything that you want us to talk about, put it in the comments.
Perfect place to put it. Yeah, in the comments, or talk about it on Facebook. That'd be awesome. Awesome. You guys have a good one. God bless you, and we will talk to you next time.
Yeah.
Bye.